Welcome to session 10 of our Essential Small Group Study. This is our last session together, and today we'll be looking at chapter 34 of Exodus. So David, fill us in on this chapter. Where are we in the Exodus story?
We are, the most important feature of this story in terms of the movement is we are right after the golden calf incident. And I do think it's valuable to reiterate the fact that the golden calf story really is kind of like another fall narrative, but for the people of Israel. So you think of the fall that occurs in the garden. This is kind of like that, but for the corporate people of Israel. They make this immense mistake, and it is hugely damaging to them and to their future. In fact, we'll find out later that Moses has complications entering into the tabernacle because his people did not keep the covenant and made an idol. So it's following immediately on the heels of that episode where they've created the idol. And so Moses has to go back up the mountain. Remember, he throws down the tablets, they break into pieces. So he has to go back up the mountain for another 40 days and another 40 nights in order to receive the law of God once again and to come back down with the 2 tablets of stone that carry the commandments on them. So that's where we are.
He's made a lot of trips up that mountain.
He's gone up and down the mountain a lot. That's right. And likewise, he's having to reiterate or have that covenant reiterated once again.
Now, God goes into some of the details of the law, which has already been given in this chapter. Why does he do that?
Yeah, I think there are a few reasons. The first is, if you read these carefully, you'll notice there's a lot of overlap between these commandments and some of the 10 commandments. And it's important to think of the 10 commandments as the kind of paradigmatic beginning of all of the commandments. There are hundreds of commandments that are given throughout the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and these 10 are sort of they're like the mainstays. There's a reason that we keep them in our churches and that they're very important to us. And so what's happening here is Moses is reapplying some of the material from those 10 commandments to a people who have not kept those commandments. You might think of it this way, like, we have a constitution and all of that, but then we have to have people actually think through applying the Constitution to a world that continues to change. And so after they've faced such a devastating bout of idolatry, sort of fall narrative, they're, in a word, rethinking how to do the law, how to think of the 10 commandments, and how to carry those out in the future.
Okay. And you got to also talk some about sacrifice, offerings, the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Why does he begin to talk about these issues as well?
That's right. You'll notice this if you've read there are commandments that are moral in nature, but then there are all of these ritual commands. And of course, these are nothing new. We've had lots of ritual commands about how to build the tabernacle, how to enter into God's presence. Further down the line, if you finish the book of Exodus, there's going to be a lot about the furniture that's in the tabernacle. Very specific stuff. And one of the reasons that material is in there is because these are about the patterns of living in God's presence. So the goal, again, it's not like persnickety rules necessarily. It's about coming into the presence of God, living fully in his presence, and cultivating the kind of space that is hospitable for human beings to come into the power and might and the unrelenting love of God. So all of these, the ritual days, the sacrifices, the furniture, it's all about entering into God's presence, which again, they have betrayed, and so they're doing it once again. They're doing another go of learning how to come into God's presence with faith and hope and seriousness.
So as followers of Jesus, as we look back on this passage, how does this apply to us? How does this connect to the New Testament that's been given to us?
Well, the most prominent way is one that you actually noted several sessions ago, but the most powerful way that we see these rules set into place in the New Testament is the way that Jesus fulfills all of them. Remember, Jesus is a Jew. He kept the ritual law. He was obedient to the rabbis and the teachers. He has fully thrown himself into the Levitical codes. He knows everything about the Pentateuch. He fulfills and satisfies all of the commands given here, and he embodies all the furnishings of the kind of human postures that would make God's presence acceptable. In other words, Jesus accomplishes this work of allowing God's presence to not just come in the midst of people, but to inhabit their very being. God is human. So that's the first one. And then the second thing that it makes me think of is the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, it is a sermon on the Mount. It's on a mountain. It's meant to reflect all that we see here on Mount Sinai. This is why that it happens on a mountain is no mistake. And so when Jesus gives us the Sermon on the Mount, think the Beatitudes, think all of the law about forgiveness, all of the, there's so much there. All of those things are a reiteration and a renewal and a refining of what God truly wants his people to be. Again, and you noted this not long ago, Colin, not so that they can be super people or something, but so that they can manifest God's goodness to the world. They can show people this is how good God is. This is what his graciousness looks like. This is how wonderful he is. So the Sermon on the Mount is a clear correlate in my mind to all that's given on Sinai.
Well, as we wrap up our discussion, any final thoughts that you want to end with?
I think really just one. This whole story of Exodus, there's so much in here. We hope that you have talked about, hundreds of great things. But really at its heart, this story is about God rescuing his people against all odds and doing so with his own presence. So he actually rescues his people into his own presence. And that's why when you read the book, there's all this narrative stuff about rescue, and then there's all this material about his presence. And it's because our life, everything that we long for is met in God. And so the takeaway I would give is, think of Jesus as the one who rescues us into the presence of God. Think of the Holy Spirit as the one who rescues us out of our struggles, sin, self-hatred, whatever it is, into God's loving embrace. And think of the church as the people who are redeemed out of bondage and into this role of carrying God's presence into the world. We're not going to do it perfectly, just like Israel, but we get the chance to try. And by God's mercy, we are forgiven and pushed forward in that role and responsibility. So those are the things I think about. A little long-winded, but that's my final take on this passage in the book of Exodus.
Well, we're so grateful that you've joined us for these past 10 weeks as we've read Exodus together as a church. It's been a real blessing for us as clergy to reflect on Exodus together, and we hope that's been true in your groups as well.